We're on?
Yeah.
Okay, well, if we're indeed on, Eric, are we on? I guess so. Everybody knows me, perhaps, as Fred Plotkin, and this is Fred Plotkin on Fridays on IDAGIO. And who would I want to join me, even though she's just not too far from me across the river in New Jersey, and I'm in New York, and viewers are watching all over the world. But I can say this in all truth, the one and the only Christine Goerke, who
Thank you. Hi.
I'm going to start by paying you compliments now so we can get them out of the way. Not only is she a marvelous soprano, great actor, and so on, but she is in effect the den mother for all the singers in the world. She is the model, the leader, who singers turn to for advice, for a role model about how to run a career, which is to say, with openness, honesty, the occasional tear that I see coming to the eye now. But it's very much from the heart. So Christine, welcome.
Thank you so
for
much,
doing this.
Fred.
I
I'm
decided,
terrible at compliments, actually, but you are so unbelievably kind. Thank you for that.
well, just take them. What I wanted to do, because we have viewers all around the world, and you and I are from the same metropolitan area, which is to say the New York metropolitan area. This program is not about the coronavirus every week, but viewers know that the New York area has taken a very hard hit. And you have the particular distinction of being a New York girl from Long Island, but you now live in New Jersey. So I wanted to have you clarify for people, what are the similarities and what are the differences between New York and New Jersey, for example?
Yeah.
The hair.
The hair. Both have very big hair. It's very nice.
Or no hair.
Or no hair. We have exceptional accents.
We all like bagels. Between New York and New Jersey?
You know, if you ask there are two bridges difference. That's what I always say. So, you know, there's, for those people who are all over the world, not terribly familiar with the geography of the area. New York State, Long Island, New Jersey, Manhattan's in the middle. So when I moved from Long Island, we always make jokes about how many bridges you have to cross to get to the other side. And my family officially thought I was a traitor for going to New Jersey. And but officially I have to cross two bridges to get to them and they to me. So I'm not very popular with everybody at the moment, because not only is it expensive, it takes forever. But
and different airports. I know you and I talk a lot about flying when we used to fly, and you go out of Newark and I tend to go out of Kennedy or LaGuardia. And
you know,
I tried it.
I always went out of Newark anyway. I found it so difficult to get to Kennedy Airport. So,
well, actually,
nobody understands that, but the two of us. But it is difficult. I promise.
In that, when you were, before you got married, you lived in New York City.
I did.
And if I recall, you had a rather illustrious roommate.
I did. We, Sandra Radvanovsky and I were roommates for 2 years. We did say that was the loudest apartment on the Upper West Side.
So I was thinking about New York, New Jersey. Let's put it to you this way. New York or Long Island, Billy Joel, New Jersey, Bruce Springsteen. Does that explain the difference?
It kind of does. And I mean, you know, you can't go really wrong with either one of those two.
New York, Tony Bennett, Frank Sinatra, New Jersey.
There it is.
New York, Robert De Niro, New Jersey, Meryl Streep.
There's a slight difference there, but yes.
Yeah, but the two, you know, in their way, the two greatest actors on film.
Absolutely. So I agree with you.
I think the point I want to make here, and then we'll actually talk about music that we love, is this metropolitan area, not just the 5 boroughs of New York City where I was born and grew up, but the whole metro area has incredible character, incredible tenacity, incredible humor in the face of trouble. And we really do pull together, not everyone. We have an exile living in public housing in Washington, but he's not, we don't think of him as a New Yorker. But apart from that, it's an area with incredible solidarity. And I
It is.
want you to know, and I want our listeners to know, that we get through these things really well because of the particular character of this area. I won't say the whole country, the whole world, but there's something about the New York metropolitan area that you see the kind of people I pointed out of Tony Bennett, Sinatra, Billy Joel, Springsteen, De Niro, Meryl Streep, Christine Goerke. You cover the waterfront. It's a very particular thing. So with that in mind, I want to start talking to you about some of the music that you selected that our listeners can listen to on Adagio that provides inspiration, because Fred Plotkin on Fridays is about inspiration in our current time, but way into the future, because you can watch this on YouTube. You told me that Brahms's song Dein Blaues Auge was the very first piece of lieder that you learned when you decided to become a singer. Did
That's
someone
right.
hand you that, or did you pick it up?
So there were sort of, there was a folder of sort of the basics, laying around. And I also sort of nosed my way into a graduate program. I was a student at the State University of New York at Stony Brook, and it's a wonderful music program, but it is largely a graduate program. And when I attended, I was an undergraduate in college, and I sort of surprisingly was obnoxious enough to push my way into the graduate studies. And they had a folder full of Brahms laying around in the voice studio one day. And so I started nosing through, and I thought, oh, this is a short one. This will be easy. It's not that it was hard, but it's the kind of piece that you don't really understand fully and for your entire life. It changes, and it's such simple poetry, and it's so beautiful, but with every passing day it means something different to you. For me, this is the beauty of Brahms. Even just hearing instrumental music, I find the colors that he uses, the phrasing that he uses, the harmonics that he uses. I am a big Brahms fan.
I have long said that I believe that each one of us who loves music, or even if we don't, we have different blood types and heartbeats and rhythms and so on within us. And that each person has maybe one or two composers where you feel every single note. Mine are Rossini and Berlioz, which doesn't mean that I don't love all the others, but when I'm asked to name the music that, my favorite, I always list certain favorites and then say every note by Rossini and Berlioz. In Rossini, it's the energy, it's the surge, it's the surprise. In Berlioz, it's the texture, the architecture, the profundity, the emotion, and the strings above all. Is Brahms one of those for you?
Brahms is one of those for me. And you used a lot of adjectives. Something that I always associate with Brahms for myself is discovery. I feel like every time I go back to anything that the man wrote, I find something new. And I find, with every passing day, this is the glory of music, isn't it? We live our lives. And today, this piece, whatever it happens to be, means one thing to us. And tomorrow, it can mean something totally different, because something else will have happened to us. And we will find another color, another emotion in that piece. For me, I find that with Brahms a lot. You mentioned your two. I completely agree with you about Berlioz. Just amazing. Rossini's not my jam. I get it, but not the one that gets me. Britten does this for me. Benjamin Britten does this for me. Strauss does this for me. And I'd be thrown out of my repertoire if, of course, I didn't say Wagner did the same for me, which he does.
But all right, so I'm going to make a confession. When I wrote Classical Music 101, which is a textbook that I wrote about music, I interviewed many artists. When I wrote Opera 101, I felt I could do that myself. I had the material. But I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to interview performers about different composers and pieces? And I had Krista Ludwig and Marilyn Horn and Valery Gergiev and Emmanuel Ax and Joshua Bell. And the last person I was able to get, thank goodness, was James Levine. And we
Mm.
discussed Mozart's 40th symphony. And we're going to talk a bit about Mozart in a moment. And after the conversation, which was brilliant from his point of view and what I learned, he said to me, okay, Freddie, as he called me, what composer, when you started writing this book, did you not really get that you now find indispensable? And I said, that's Schubert. And he said, that's right. Schubert is not easy to get to, but once it's in you, it's there completely. And boy, is he there for me completely. Now, I wrote this book 20 years ago, and then he said, all right, and what composer, despite all of your efforts, have you still not incorporated yet? I said, that would be Brahms. And he said, not good.
Wow, isn't that amazing?
So
You know,
I've
it's
been on a learning curve with Brahms. And I do love his music. I just, whatever the blood type or DNA or whatever, mine does not connect with Brahms. So,
oh, isn't that funny?
but I mean, I love a lot of his music.
Sure.
Not pretend. The German Requiem is magnificent. Many of the songs are magnificent. I like the violin concerto, but there are other violin concertos I like more. But I think what I like about Brahms is his persona. The fact that he was, in effect, an adept of Robert Schumann, and then basically took over the household and had a platonic love affair with Clara Schumann, and then went to Vienna and worked with the violinist Joseph Joachim, who was very influential. They created basically this school of musicianship in Vienna, and he was a very generous patron of other composers, of musicians, and so on. And to me, the great thing about Brahms was his launching of so many careers with such generosity and such passion. You look at him in Dvorak. There's a great book to be written by someone else about Brahms' impact on music, because I don't see anyone like him in the 19th century in terms of his actually reaching out. So I love Brahms for that. I love some of his music, and I'm still learning. And the great thing about music, as you know, is we still are learning. Michelangelo, my favorite words, Michelangelo, when he was 82, he said, ancora imparo, I'm still learning. And that was Michelangelo. So that's my motto, ancora imparo. So Benjamin Britten, you mentioned, and you told me that Peter Grimes is your desert island opera.
It is.
Have you ever sung Ellen Orford? The leading
Twice.
female role? Twice. Okay. And what is it about her, if there is something about her that you connect to?
Oh gosh, unfortunately, entirely too much. You know, I am the eldest, and I want to save everyone. I want to fix everyone. I want to fix everything. I am unfortunately such a control freak. I'm trying so hard, and it's not easy at this very moment in quarantine. I have news for you. But no, it's funny because you say the thing that you didn't get in the beginning and then you got. So when we were all starting out as singers, we have to put together our audition arias, our competition arias, and there always has to be from certain sets in time and certain periods. And a lot of sopranos of my ilk would choose the embroidery aria from Peter Grimes, the Ellen Orford's aria. And when it was handed to me, I thought, oh, it's in 5/4. I don't get it. I don't understand this. I mean, it's fine, but whatever. I remember I got to really love the music. And it's one of those things where once you start to do something and it becomes a part of you, the harmonies become a constant in your musical mind, so that you hear them as you would listen to, say, Poulenc, and you hear the seventh as a harmonic tone. It's not something that is leading to something else. It's a tonic somehow with Poulenc. And it's a similar situation, Strauss and Britten. When you understand the harmonies, that's how they go. So Britten became sort of a part of who I am, what I understood. And the first time I really let the music connect to me, I was in a staging rehearsal for this aria, which I had sung so many times for auditions, but I was on stage and I was kneeling and I was holding this sweater with an anchor on it, and I was singing, and suddenly I started sobbing. I couldn't stop. We had to stop the stage in orchestra rehearsal. I was mortified. It was the only time I ever went too far over the line in an orchestra rehearsal like that. But that music touched me so much that, I mean, I could barely breathe. And once I got over being embarrassed, I thought how miraculous that music can do that to a human being, that we can reach that far down into our soul. Choose your composer, choose your piece. Doesn't matter if it's vocal, instrumental, it's choral, it makes no difference whatsoever. But if a piece can reach down into your soul and evoke that kind of emotion, that's quite a miracle, isn't it?
It is. And I want to ask, you were describing your approach to this music, but really to any music, in musicological terms. Yet you are also—
I am sorry, I'm such a theory geek.
No, but you're also a performer. So your approach into a song, into a role, I imagine you start musicologically, but then you put aside the 5/4 time and all of that and go into the role. Tell me
Absolutely.
about the process of studying a part and then creating the role.
So yes, I mean, for me, people learn music in different ways. For me, the music goes in super quickly. I'll listen to it, I will learn it, it will be in my head. The time that I like to take with something is after that, when I have an opportunity to think about the text, when I have an opportunity to think about the story, and my favorite part, the backstory, which may or may not actually be there. With any character, I like to find the reason that they behave the way that they do, especially the baddies. I get to do a lot of those. They're a lot of fun. But if the way I approach every character is that person is correct, they haven't done something wrong, they've always done something right because that is the right course for them and the truth that they know. So if somebody has murdered their father, well, it's because he deserved it. Let me tell you why. Okay, or maybe they did or maybe they didn't. But I love to go in and I find that. And I also love to be able to spend the time with the text. You know, that's one of the glorious things about being a singer. You know, we have all this beautiful music, but we have the addition of text, which gives us an ability to use a palette of colors. Every instrument, every singer has one, and not one of them is alike. So we get to make choices every time we sing something. And if it's the same thing, if it's the same song, if it's the same opera, we get to make the decision that day. What do we want to say that day? How do we want to say it? What color do we want to use? What kind of line do we want to sing? A long legato, beautiful line? Do we want to spit the text out that day? It's one of the coolest things about being a singer. You get to think a lot and you get to change things very often.
As you go into the study, as you described it, what if the character may or may not be insane? Or what if she may be angry and, in her view, justified? So Electra or Ortrud are characters who we love, even though we wouldn't want to hang out with them all the time. I would, but
I would too. I mean, that's popcorn worthy.
I think a good neutral but descriptive word is troubled. They are troubled people. And whether the trouble comes from insanity or whether they're justified and they're upset leads to a different interpretive approach.
If you are insane, you never know you're insane, do you?
Don't ask me.
Well, good night, folks. Doing very well, Fred. You know what I mean, though? I mean, if you are acting insane, we've all acted insane in our lives. I mean, you know, I've had 2 babies. I've been in labor. I've acted insane, but I didn't think I was acting insane. So if someone is in that state of mind, they never really think that they are acting that way. They think everyone else is overreacting or they're underreacting. No one else understands what the truth actually is. I always approach every role from the point that every character is 100% sane and everyone else is wrong.
Well, let's go back to Grimes and Ellen Orford because,
Mhm.
and correct me if you disagree, but I think that Ellen Orford's emotional range that we see, maybe not what she feels, but what we see, is rather limited by the propriety of the town, her role as a school teacher, her connection to the outsider Peter Grimes, but also being a teacher, her care about children, and we have a couple of little boys die in the story. Um, she's called upon to really take some positions that the town objects to, even though the town is full of a bunch of hypocrites too, where aunties and nieces are actually madams and prostitutes. And Ellen is a more traditional, upstanding figure, let's say. I'm not judging, but more traditionally upstanding. And then you have Peter Grimes, who has a vast emotional range that goes from believing he's right to insanity, depending on the tenor who plays him. How do you take a character such as Ellen, who has a more limited range demonstrably, and fill in her backstory and bring her character to life?
Does she have more of a limited range? Or are we just dealing with the text that she has? She's on stage an awful lot.
Yeah.
You
But when
know,
I
for me,
say range, I don't mean emotional. I mean what the librettist and the
yes.
composer, Montague Slater, the librettist, and Benjamin Britten, the composer, have given her to you, the performer, to work with.
Well, that's just what I mean. The thing is that when the two of them were working together and we're looking at the text set for Ellen by Benjamin Britten, it's very clear what that text does and what color is underneath that as far as the orchestration goes. But what about when she's not singing? For me, I always find so much more interest in the silence when I'm not singing, when I am on stage. You go back to saying that same old thing, acting is reacting. So you're always given something different by your colleagues. If you work with, as you say, this particular Peter Grimes views things this way, this particular Peter Grimes views this way. Every time we work with a different colleague, they bring us something new. And that means our reactions are something new. And it's the time in between that we get to make the decisions. We can't change the text. We can't change our music when we're singing, but it's the in-between time that we can show things that are going on in our heads, whether or not they seem to be part of her character. Do you know, I mean, it's like when you're watching somebody in a crowd, right? And you know this person is very proper, but you catch them doing something out of the corner of your eye and did you see that? Did you see what she just did? Did you see the face she just made? That was horrible. You know, there's always those moments. To me, that's the coolest part of what I get to do. You know, it's the things that are not on the page. Does that make any sense?
It makes complete sense. I mean, viewers know that you and I are friends, so I can tell them that I paid you a compliment in the past that to me was the most normal thing, and you said it was a very meaningful compliment. Namely, you were one of the best listeners I know in opera. The other one, and sometime we want to go back and look at his performances, is Matti Salminen, the Finnish bass, is a magnificent listener and reactor. And it's glorious to watch him as Hagen, as whoever, because of his ability to make so much of a character when he's not singing.
Mm-hmm.
I want to give our listeners a little background about Peter Grimes and Benjamin Britten because they may not know this story. I began our conversation talking about New York for a reason. Benjamin Britten lived in New York in the 1930s and toward the beginning of World War II. He lived in Brooklyn with his partner, Peter Pears. He lived in a household that had some rather unusual people in it. Most of them were starving artists, except for one, the stripper Gypsy Rose Lee, who lived in the household and paid most of the rent. And, you know, it was not common for two men to be an open gay couple at the time in the 1930s, but they were, Pears and Britten. And Britten he was a pacifist, as was Pears, and decided that he was not going to fight in the army in World War II, But on the other hand, as an Englishman, he felt that there was something that he needed to do. So he and Pears, during the war in 1942, sailed across the Atlantic to return to the UK, I believe in Liverpool, but I'm not certain, maybe Belfast, and traveled to Aldeburgh where they lived. And he received a commission from Serge Koussevitzky, the conductor. His wife had died, Koussevitzky's wife had died. And as a tribute to her, Koussevitzky wanted Britten to compose an opera. And it paid him $1,000, which at that time was a lot of money. And Britten wrote Peter Grimes during World War II under bombing. He and Pears performed recitals all over England in concert halls as the country was being bombed. And this was their contribution to the war effort. So we have to understand Peter Grimes, set around 1830, is also a mirror of the trauma that Britain and the world, but certainly Britain, was undergoing at that time. And he experienced it as a pacifist who nonetheless was angry, to put it mildly, at Germany for starting the war and destroying a lot of Britain in the United Kingdom. And so it's a fascinating thing. We perhaps separate that when we approach this opera to work on it, but every opera has a backstory. And, I was impressed. I've never met anyone before, not even John Vickers, who has said that it was their favorite opera. John Vickers liked a bunch of Wagner, and as I do too, of course, but you love it.
I love it. I love it. I know. It's so funny. And that's really saying something, because for me to say that it is my favorite over what is super duper close for me, which is Electra, which I find to be an astonishing composition, as an astonishing story, an astonishing orchestration. I love Strauss so much. Love it. Not just for paying my bills, putting my kids through college, but also because I love it. But there is something about this piece. Growing up on Long Island, I grew up near the ocean, and it was, when I was upset about something, I would go and sit on the shore, and I would, there's something about this. And one of the pieces that I chose to listen to, and I hope that you will all take a moment to listen to these. I think they are, even standalones, the sea interludes from Peter Grimes are just astonishing orchestral works. And they are poems to me, without words, and they speak so strongly and clearly. I can picture every single thing that I would see if I was on a beach, if I see a storm coming in, and you hear seagulls. It's, to me, it reminds me of my youth, my childhood, and it's really a part of me.
Before I move on to the next pick, I wanted to point out that Leonard Bernstein's last concert before he died was in Tanglewood with the Boston Symphony, and he was very ill. And so what do you choose if you know it's probably your last concert? He conducted these sea interludes and Beethoven's Seventh Symphony.
Wow.
And there exists a recording of it. The Deutsche Grammophon did, I believe. I don't know if IDAGIO has it. We'll have to look. But I will say that the Beethoven Seventh, with its energy, with its dancing, even though he was very ill, was very impressive. But it was the sea interludes in that performance of Tanglewood that I will never forget. So, Christine, if you don't know that performance,
I will find it.
So the next piece you picked told me something about you that I didn't know and that you and I share. We both had as our instrument the clarinet.
How long have we known each other that I'm just finding this out right now?
And I didn't know that about you. But I was a clarinet student, clarinet and voice as a kid. And well, I can now tell you the story that I was a pretty good clarinetist, and I was in junior high school, and then a kid stole my clarinet. And we didn't have a lot of money, and I couldn't afford another clarinet. It was gone for the year, and I stopped playing the clarinet. And on the last day of school, I saw him walking, holding my white clarinet case. And even though he was much bigger than me, I don't know what got into me, but I just tackled him to the ground. I've never inflicted violence
Yes.
on anyone. I beat him up. I took back my clarinet. I still have it here, but unfortunately the spell was broken and I stopped playing clarinet. And when
Until
I'm,
now.
see that? I mean,
So
maybe,
next see us, we'll be doing some duets for you.
okay. But I still have the clarinet here as a reminder of that. I never, gave it away, though I could, and one day I will. But as a reminder of that, because the offense that I took that someone would steal my clarinet, he never played it, he just stole it.
Just
And
because.
yeah, yeah, and
Don't
it was
mess with
very
internet
cool.
players, friends.
So you chose the clarinet quintet, Kerschel 581 by Mozart, and the recording you chose was with Richard Stoltzman and the Tashi Quartet. What is it about this piece or the instrument of the clarinet?
So my way into the clarinet, in fourth grade, they all came up to us. I said, right, we can pick a band instrument. So I trotted home and I said, Dad, I want to play the flute. And he said, great, here's the clarinet. I like Artie Shaw. And I thought, not really proud of that because now I'm a huge Artie Shaw fan.
Sure.
But at the time I was like, oh, I'm not really happy about this. I really wanted to play the flute. All the other girls are playing the flute, but that's what I got. So I started to play, and I did all of the usual things growing up, except one unusual thing. My neighbors can still remember me in the summers sitting out on my porch playing the cantina scene from Star Wars ad nauseum. I'm so sorry, neighbors, I really am. And it was quite remarkable. And I love John Williams, but I'm sorry, Mr. Williams, as well, because it wasn't very good. But I really fell in love with it, and I ended up really loving classical music. And in the 10th grade, I started working on Mozart's Clarinet Concerto. And in 11th grade, there was a statewide competition in NISMA. It's New York State Solo Music Association soloist, I can't remember, which makes me a singer. But I practiced and I went ahead and I went and I did this, and then the competition. I was very proud of myself. I think I got a 92 or a 93. And I worked on it forever, and I fell completely in love with it. And that started a lifelong love of Mozart for me. And, I was lucky enough when I started singing to scoot right into all of the Mozart operas as well. I truly believe that playing all of that Mozart and working hard on my trills and my phrasings and understanding how all of the accents worked, the phrasing worked, I took that with me, and I brought that into the singing. So I really was terrible at this quintet, but I've always loved it.
Do you still play the clarinet? Christine, do you still play the clarinet?
In fact, actually, I not only play the clarinet, I play the bass clarinet. And I played the bass clarinet in my community band sometimes in the summer.
Well, here's my thinking. If Lizzo can make a career and also play the flute, you can bring your clarinet on the stage, and in a riff, you can play whatever you want.
Well, I will tell you, at one point I was singing Rosalinda in Die Fledermaus, and I said, I have an idea. Why don't I play the opening of the Czardas, and then I can sing it? And they said, great idea. Well, it takes quite a little bit of time to take a reed out and, make sure that the reed is moist enough, and then put it on the thing and tune it. It didn't work. Lucky for all of you. But we did try.
I want to comment also on the clarinet and Mozart. My favorite Mozart opera is La Clemenza di Tito, which was written in 1791. And Mozart and the clarinet is very particular because there was a clarinetist named Johann Stadler, Stadler, who basically revolutionized the instrument and clarinet playing in 1790, the year before Mozart died. And Mozart, I mentioned before James Levine in the 40th Symphony, Mozart took the clarinet and made it a protagonist in a lot of his final works because he was so enchanted with it, beginning with the 40th Symphony and then the 41st, but also in the quintet, in the concerto, and in La Clemenza di Tito.
Mhm.
And so when those final works, when I was learning the clarinet, as all of us who study that instrument, that's where we go because it's so beautiful. Also in
Mhm.
Wagner, Wagner knew what to do with the clarinet.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And I won't admit to being downstairs in my music room trying to play through from my vocal score all of the bass clarinet parts, but that might have happened recently.
So let's talk about Wagner. Um, the fourth selection that you chose, which is a fabulous one, is Gotterdammerung, a recording with highlights of a live performance with Helen Traubel and Loritz Melchior, conducted by Arturo Toscanini and the NBC Symphony in New York in 1952. Why that particular performance
At Carnegie Hall.
at Carnegie?
So no, honestly, it's every single component of that for me. Every performer, the band, the place, that is for me a magical combination. It truly, truly was. And I also was fortunate enough to sing basically the same program at Carnegie Hall with Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, with Maestro Levine and Stefan Winke a couple of years ago. And when I was looking through the catalog to try and pick, by the way, trying to pick 4 things from this immense catalog, that was quite a task. So I hope that you enjoy the ones I chose, but there are so many more we don't have time to discuss. Um, I I loved it. For people sort of who are not big into Wagner, Wagner's not my thing. It's too long. I don't want to sit through it. I I love to tell people about this particular recording. I call it sort of Götterdämmerung light. You know, you get all the best bits of it and you get to understand why I'm so excited about it. The the range of emotion that is in within all of these excerpts, I feel like it captures everything in the piece for me. So I don't know. It's and I gosh, Traubel and Melchior, come on. I mean, those voices, they are singular.
Traubel, I discovered, was born on June 16th of
So close.
1899 and died on July 28th, 1972. Given the mix of singers who Wagner lovers tend to talk about, Nielsen, Varney, people like that, um, sometimes Helen Traubel is forgotten. And actually, she filled in when Kirsten Flagstad went back to Norway in World War II and someone else got sick. And suddenly the only person the Met had was Helen Traubel. She began her opera singing relatively late. She was 37 or 38. And she had a hearty sense of humor, a big laugh. She was an American woman and all the good senses of that. She was from St. Louis. And she, tell me about Helen Traubel and your view about what she represents.
I I kind of identify with this lady actually quite a little bit. She was never seemingly too full of herself. She was always unapologetically who she was. She never tried to be anyone else. You know, I fear that in this career, no matter what period we're looking at, whether it was, you know, in the late 1800s, insert favorite singer here, you know, in the 1940s, insert favorite singer here, in 1980s, 1990s, the 2000s, it just, I think that it is easy to lose yourself in this business trying to be what we think people want. I am always so taken with the singers who don't lose that. And there was something honest about Traubel and something honest about her singing and about her person that I have always been completely in love with. And I mean, I do love that instrument so very much, but I agree with you. I do feel like she is sometimes an afterthought, and it makes me a bit sad because I don't think that she deserves to be an afterthought.
Now, also in this recording is Arturo Toscanini and the NBC Symphony. And what people who are not from the New York area may not know is that Toscanini had a huge role in our musical life. At the first decade of the 20th century, both he and Gustav Mahler were resident in New York, conducting at the Met and the New York Philharmonic. Imagine that. And Richard Strauss and Puccini came over occasionally to also work here. And Toscanini was a profound anti-fascist. And when Mussolini came in 1922, Toscanini was beaten up by the fascists on a couple of occasions, famously in Bologna in 1935 or 36. And so Toscanini became resident in New York and founded the NBC Symphony. And they performed in Studio 8H. They did recordings. American viewers will know that that's where Saturday Night Live is performed. And it's amazing to me that the predecessor in there was the NBC Symphony, back when in the US, there were radio symphonies. We know that in Germany, Austria, Italy, and France, other countries, BBC in England, there is the radio symphony. There's a wonderful Danish radio symphony. We unfortunately don't have those anymore, but Toscanini created a wonderful model here. And so much of the recordings of the mid-20th century with him are the NBC Radio Symphony. So they were a terrific band, and they had many players. One of them was Anton Coppola, who was the uncle of the famous film director Francis Ford Coppola. Maestro Coppola died very recently at the age of 103. He worked to the end. He was a composer. And some of you know that I write for WQXR Radio in New York. On his 100th birthday, which was March of 3 years ago, he shared a birthday with Toscanini, by the way. I published an interview that I did with him, and he was really quite something. So this is more stuff that we can study in our spare time that some of us have. Christine, did I leave anything out? I know you and I could do this for hours.
We could do this for hours, but I also will say about Traubel that she is another cool Gemini. Our birthdays are only 4 days apart.
I'm a Taurus, and we get along very, very well. And so, viewers, I want to really thank my beloved Christine Goerke. I want to tell you that I have a good lineup. I have May 8th, I have Ben Heppner, magnificent tenor. On May 15th, I have Julia Bullock, an outstanding young American soprano who lives in Germany. On May 22nd, I have the incomparable bass. I used incomparable about you. He's incomparable too. Ferruccio Furlanetto, who is my mother's favorite singer. And I don't declare favorites because I love many, many singers, but Ferruccio is my mother's favorite singer, and that says a lot. And Christine, stay strong. Thank you for all that you give people in the public, but also people in our profession. It's a very meaningful thing. You're a model, but you don't set out to be a model, I don't think. But I mean, a role model, you could be a model. But we all thank you, and I mean that from the heart. We love you, and I will have the pleasure of being in touch with you soon. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for taking the time to watch today, and I hope to be back in front of you live soon.
You will. Bye-bye.
Bye.